first of the second season of the RPS Scotland talks. With a very good, successful season last year. Some of the names I see already that joined last year and some new ones, so welcome to the new ones and glad to see the old ones back. The new calendar has been sent to all the Scottish members, and everybody who's on previous talks got a copy of the calendar as well, so you'll have seen that the year coming up is, again, very varied, very eclectic, very interesting, and we're going to start off tonight with a real treat, because Euan, I've been sitting chatting to you for the last 10-15 minutes about stuff, about life and about photography, and Euan's a really interesting character. He has a day job, which he may or may not want to tell you what it is, but we'll let him up to that. But he's a keen photographer, an artist who uses a camera, and apart from having a job and a family and having a keen interest in photography in his own work, he thought, I'll start a wee book club, and I'll buy loads of books, which you can see part of the shelf behind him there. I'm told that's at least another 25 feet long, groaning with books and magazines and fanzines and things. So he thought, right, I'll start interviewing people and having these wee things out once a week and talking to people. And he's done that for the last couple of years now. So 100 odd episodes speaking to people with photography. That's pretty hardcore, and it's pretty interesting. So Euan's our starter tonight. So I'm going to pass it over to Euan, and he's going to tell you a wee bit about himself, and he's going to start his show, and I hope you all enjoy it. So I've muted you all, and you're probably sensible to take your cameras off as well, because the screen's going to go into Euan stuff. So I'll pass you on to Euan. Euan, crack on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. Interesting character. I don't know if I necessarily would agree with that, but certainly we'll see what we can do. So yeah, it's a bit of a different one for me. Normally I'm on the other side of the fence, interviewing people. Hopefully you can see my screen okay. If you can't, please shout out. So yeah, thank you very much for the invite to present to you tonight. I'll talk briefly about I'll talk primarily about my own photography, where it all started for me, what I've been doing recently work-wise, and I will share quite a selection of images which I've kind of got working in progress that haven't been shared on social media before. So yeah, my name is Euan. I'm based up in Glasgow. Photography for me is purely a hobby. It's not my day job. I work in commercial property. So it's really a total pressure release. My day job's very much numerical, working with very complex Excel spreadsheets. So for me, photography is a real opportunity just to step back from it. There's no pressures for me. I enjoy the outdoors, so my focus really is on capturing the landscape we live in. But I have limited time, so I've really got to focus on what I enjoy, which means I don't photograph people, don't photograph animals, sports. I enjoy looking at these photographs that other people take, but it's not for me. So I really focus very much on landscape photography, seascapes, and I have done now since I kind of really took the hobby seriously. Most people will know that I don't process images quickly. Certainly friends who I go out and photograph with, they'll generally have some images ready by the Saturday evening or the Sunday. I personally can sit on images for 2 or 3 years before I do any, and actually some of the images I'll show you later on in the talk were probably taken maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and they've been sitting in a semi-state of processed at some point, but they'll maybe see lighter day at some point in the future. And for me, I also don't really enter photographic competitions. My preference is really to exhibit in open art exhibitions. I quite enjoy the challenge of putting your work, submitting your work when it's being compared against drawings, paintings, sculptures. And so in that regard, I've exhibited at the Royal Scottish Academy, Royal Ulster Academy of Arts on several occasions and other exhibitions elsewhere. Photography for me really started as a love of travel. I took photographs when myself and my wife travelled around Japan, Europe, America, other parts of Asia. And that's really when it began, probably back in about 2006. I didn't really do anything with these photographs. I did take them all in raw format, so there's still the potential to try and rescue some of the blown out highlights. But it was a real way for me just to capture some of the travels that we went on. And it wasn't until late in 2013 that photography really became serious interest for me, which I would say has very much developed into a passion, and a very expensive passion as well. But I'm sure you all know that yourself, all being photographers. So going back to the start, I think it's important before I show you kind of the work I'm doing these days, where it all began. And like many of us in Scotland, it probably began in Glencoe at some point. This was back in 2013. There's probably a lot of blown out highlights here, but we've all got to start somewhere. And for me, it was like many other people, you see images online and you think, yeah, that looks a beautiful location. So you venture out and you try to capture those images yourself. And I think we've probably all been there at some point, but hopefully we all kind of move on and maybe progress and find our own wee niche or find our own style. This is another one from Lochard, which is just north of Glasgow. Again, this is a very popular location for people who know it. This was taken back when I was starting out doing photography. I had quite a bit of an interest in long exposures at that point. And this is a well-known jetty where if you turn up at sunrise, there'll be a dozen photographers all queuing to get the perfect spot for their tripod. Again, I think I've maybe been back here once in the last 3 or 4 years as my interests have kind of changed as I look to develop something different from my photography. Being based in Glasgow, you're not really in easy access for many woodlands or beautiful locations, but it is easy for me to get around the rest of certainly Northumberland, Lake Districts and other parts of Scotland. This is down in Lake District up at Ashness Jetty, which if you've been there, much like the jetty in the last image, if you're not there sharp, then you'll have about 6, 10, 12 people all trying to clamber over the perfect spot to get their tripod in the middle of the jetty. I think this was back in 2015. I don't think I've been back to shoot it since. And it's one of these places that I'd be quite interested to go back just to see what I would capture if I went back now, because I could guarantee that I probably would be less inclined to stand in the middle of the jetty and probably look for something very, very different. I think I'd also be there looking for slightly different conditions than we are in this photograph. This is down in the River Clyde and probably the brightest photograph you will see from myself tonight. I've never been one for bright, colourful colours, but I think this is out with a group of friends, and it's a shot that I quite like, and it kind of tells the story as I was beginning to learn and beginning to develop my skill and try to focus on things that interested me. And yeah, it's nice, colourful shots. I like the purple reflection, very still night. There's not really much else for me to say about it. It's just one of the shots that I kind of took as I was working and kind of developing my style. Another shot from up in the Trossachs. This is the 3 boats at Loch Rusky, which everyone who's been to the loch will know about. And again, I think I've shot this once, maybe twice, but it's not something that I would want to return back to. I think once you've done it once, there's only so many different ways in which you can shoot the boats without going into the water and position them exactly as you want them. And I kind of don't have the appeal or interest for doing it. There's only so many shots that you can take. And I'm not so keen on just returning to the same locations over and over again. I think there's real benefit in returning to them, but I think there's benefit in returning to locations which you can explore and really begin to develop a whole body of work, which I don't think offers such opportunities at locations like this. Another shot from down in the Lake District. This is at Buttermere, the well-known tree. And a few people always tell me that I should probably crop out or clone out the wee rocks that were in the water, but I left them in. I don't clone out very much in any of my images. My view is if they're in the shot, they're in the shot. I maybe clone out the odd bit and piece now. But I will say that I did try to print this out for someone. They wanted a print of it about a metre and a half wide, and the tree had a ridiculous white halo that took me about 3.5 hours to eradicate, but it was definitely well worth it, and I've got a copy of this up on my wall as well. Another shot from the Lake District, and again just something slightly different, and this was the sort of shots that I was probably shooting back in 2015, 2016. I would probably say a wide angle lens was generally always on my camera, whereas in the last couple of years I've never used a wide angle lens once. I think the widest I go is about 35mm, And in fact, 70 to 200mm lens normally accounts for about 95% of my shots. And that's what I now continue to use. I've now switched to Nikon mirrorless for anyone who's interested in gear talk very briefly, and I use a 24 to 200mm lens. So I have one lens, one camera, and I also shoot a Hasselblad with a single lens as well. So my equipment, my gear setup is very, very simple, and that's kind of the way I like it. But the wide angle stuff doesn't really do it for me. I've been there, and now I'm all about trying to progress and do something a wee bit different. This is again quite an old shot, based down in London, when I was going through a bit of a long exposure phase, which I still like the long exposures. I've not been back down to London to photograph it since then, and it's somewhere I'd like to go back now, having kind of developed maybe more of a style, more interest, more specific. It would be quite interesting to go back and see how I'd approach the city. I've certainly had a few books on London, particularly nice misty, foggy conditions, and I'd like to go back down in those sorts of conditions, but knowing my luck, it would be clear blue skies. Another shot, bit of a long exposure here, down south wold of the pier. And again, it's playing with the movement in the water, which is something that I continue to enjoy, just trying out different shutter speeds until I get something that actually feels right. It gives me the blend of the smoothness, but also just the kind of the connection and the emotional connection that one has to the water when you're standing there, and you can appreciate the movement and the power behind the currents. Travel is, as I said earlier, is very much a starting point for me in my photography. This was 2015, I think it was, up in the top of the Rockefeller Centre. And you can't actually get a tripod up there, but I discovered that there's a wee beanbag type device which has got a camera tripod mount built into it, which enables you to screw your camera on and stick it on the ledge, and you can then get a couple of seconds long exposure. I think New York's a fantastic city. I've been once to really photograph it. It's certainly somewhere that I could probably go back to in nice wintry, snowy conditions and spend lots of time on the streets with the architecture, just milling about and coming back with some really interesting work. I see a lot of photographers whose work I really like to follow, documentary photography, street photography of New York, and it just makes me want to go back every time I see it. This was Grand Central Terminal, again just playing around with some long exposures just to get the bit of the movement and the people, but keeping the clock face nice and sharp. Continuing with the travel theme, this was up in Iceland, and it's a simplicity which is really something that's become a big part of my photography. I don't like messy photographs. I don't like a lot going on at times. Which is why I find woodland photography quite difficult, because there is a lot going on, and I like clean, nice, simple photography that I can kind of see exactly what I'm looking at. And for me, it's just the beautiful curved nature of the S of the road at the brow of the hill, and the yellow markers on the way up. And it's a shot that I think I was ducking in and out of the middle of the road as cars were going past, just to wait for that one moment. And it's yeah, this is the sort of work I like to shoot. Unfortunately, I probably didn't know it too much at the time. Otherwise, I could probably have got a lot more shots in Iceland. But again, it just gives me ideas for when I'm going back in the future, that I'll be looking for some high roads up in the north of Iceland where there's very few tourists. Another travel-related shot, which was from Hamnoy. If any of you have been, you will know this is taken from the bridge, where you can line up on a nice sunrise morning with 40 or 50 other photographers, tripods all clambering over each other as everyone tries to get the perfect spot. But the landscape in Hamnoy and in Lofoten is just stunning. It's the pointy mountains that you would draw as a child that are right at the very edge of the road. And for me, that's just the whole fascination. I know lots of people go for the likes of the Northern Lights, and I've been fortunate enough to see the Northern Lights in Lofoten. I've taken a few shots, and I'll never do anything with the shots, because for me, the Northern Lights is really about the movement, and you cannot capture that on the camera. You get a snapshot of it, but when you're actually standing there bearing witness to what you're seeing, that to me, that's just breathtaking. But Lofoten's a wonderful location to visit, particularly because there are so many beautiful locations within a very small area that really make it very easy to go around. I've been fortunate to be in there once in the middle of winter in January, and then once again in April with my wife. And I have to say we had far more snow in April when we visited, and there wasn't a single photographer on the whole of the islands for the week that we were staying. It was absolutely bliss. And you could go anywhere and not be disturbed by workshops or tours with 11 or 12 photographers getting in your way. So I'd highly recommend going out of season. Another photograph for me is Faroe Islands. I know a bit of a touchy subject with some people, but anyway, we went back in 2017, and it's a wonderful location. It breathtakingly beautiful. The coastal lines are absolutely stunning, and just the mountain ranges in some of the islands is just wonderful. We did a lot of walking around. There are a lot of waterfalls. This is Millifosser waterfall, which is probably one of the world's best known ones. And for me, this photograph is always a good reminder of me that it's not all about the beauty of sunset and sunrise. This, for any of you who for those of you who don't know, it ended up on the cover of Outdoor Photographer. Now, when I originally submitted this image and the shortlist was announced, I think there were about 7 or 8 images from this exactly same location. Mine was the only one that looked like this. The rest of them were beautiful colours in the skies, probably from sunset. But this was the one that made it the farthest, and it just reminded me, actually, it's capturing the reality and presenting what is probably more traditional in terms of the Faroese weather conditions than the beautiful colour. And that's always stuck with me, and I'm always happy now to go out and photograph in dreich conditions, as the Scots would say. I love a good bit of mist, a lot of fog, love snow. Not so much a fan of the rain, but then once the rain stops, you can often get some spectacular conditions. Heading back up to Lofoten again, went through a phase. I still do have a tilt shift lens, which is beautiful to use, a wee bit complex and tricky, but for getting close into some spots, it's really good, and you don't have to then deal with everything being out of perspective. But yeah, at this point, I was beginning to take maybe a different approach, and I was beginning to work on sets of images and thinking about it as opposed to just stand one-off images, which I think up until that point kind of I'd really focused on. This one was down in the Holy Isle. And this was an interesting shot because it was at this point I discovered a certain brand of filters didn't work when you were using a lens over 100 millimeters, because there wasn't a drop of wind anywhere, and the majority of the shots that I took on this were all long exposures and were all very blurry. And after a bit of testing at home, I discovered that it was basically once you got over a certain point in the lens. And needless to say, I did a bit of a dispute with the filter company, and I don't use their filters anymore. But again, this is just something that I became interested in, just the simplicity of it, the nice bold colour of the stakes on Pilgrim's Way, and then just the water and the beach and the smoothness. And I've tried to photograph this a few times, but my predictions of the tide times never seem to be quite right, or when it says it's a high tide, it's not quite high enough to get the water at the level you need to. Another shot by the coast is up in Portobello Beach, and again it's a location I enjoyed exploring, quite easy to get to. A lot of swimmers, unfortunately, but it's the groins, the structures, and the combination of that bold element of the marker and the groin, but also just with the smoothness of the water and the sky. And it's, for me, I really enjoy being by the sea. I enjoy the connection I have with the water and the stillness and peacefulness that I find just standing and enjoying the start of a new day. Most of my work now is all black and white, so colour it now becomes quite irrelevant. But again, just a lovely location that I've enjoyed visiting, and I would like to go back and I think recapture some new work there. This is another shot from the same location. I think now if I was to look at this shot, be cropping out the marker and distance and really focusing on the movement in the water. That's something that appeals to me. I think now I've really gone to thinking more on projects, and not even so much projects, but themes and topics of ideas that begin to interest me that I can kind of capture and build upon over a period of time, and build upon in different locations, so that I can go to the other side of Scotland and capture and add work to maybe a set I've been working on in the west coast of Scotland that just has a commonality between it. And that's something that gives me interest and gives me a bit of excitement, as opposed to having to return to the same locations all the time. I love exploring new places. Woodlands, I've kind of briefly mentioned. I love woodland photography. It's not something I'm not particularly say great at it. It's not where I would say I'm strong at it, but I've enjoyed doing it, and I continue to work more and more at it. And I think I'm slowly beginning to get a good feel now for what works for me. Personally, with colour, I just find the oranges and greens far too much. So actually now working on black and white, I think it helps me. But I think the big problem is I see so many woodland photographs from down south where it seems to be on tap every weekend, every day. There seems to be somewhere down south that's got missed, and frankly we just don't get it to the same extent in Scotland. I think in Glasgow I've maybe had 2 or 3 misty days in the last 2 or 3 years, and one of them I was stuck inside because my wife had COVID, so I couldn't leave the building. So I think that really helps me, and for me, for the style of photography I like, it begins to simplify the scene far more and gives me far more separation. Whereas I find quite often or not, I'm running into woodlands and there isn't that, and I just get lost and confused, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. This was shot as I really do persevere with woodland photography quite a bit. This was up in Cairngorms one May when there was a nice dusting of snow. And I think just from the perseverance, I've begun to feel as though I'm actually a bit more comfortable with woodland photography. This was a shot Isle of Egg, again using the tilt and shift, and just a subject that I quite like, just with the foreground rocks mirroring up with the rocks in the background, just taking you through the scene. And then kind of returning to Glencoe after a number of years. This is still 2019 before lockdown, and yeah, it was a good opportunity to try the tilt. If I remember correctly, I think this was the first outing. But then more recently, I would say I've started working, as I said, in kind of bodies of work or sets of images. Skate Raw is a lovely spot that I like to go to, and I can just spend time exploring all the slabs that I think then connect to other parts of the country. This was up in Lochard, just as a very different sort of shot, which I think a few people suggested could be the front cover of a heavy metal album. And then kind of the last 3 kind of colourful shots, really. This is I've done a bit of a series of field lines, which is something that I really quite enjoy, looking over valleys across the other side of the road and just seeing the lines of fences, the lines of stone walls, and just the tracks up the side. And it was really when I started shooting this sort of work that I began to make a big move away from single images. Same with this shot, which I think was like all about ridge points. And again, it's something that I now begin to look out for as I'm working my way through bodies of work. And I quite often see that I've shot images in the past along this sort of idea without actually realizing it. And this was an image called Quarter Dark, which again, very much based on the field lines aspect of it. And it's for me, a big part of it's the brick wall that goes up the middle of the picture, but then there's a wee gap between the trees and the wall, which I think for me really adds to the image. If it wasn't for that gap, it wouldn't have the same impact, because you would have no idea that there was a wall there in the first place. So as I say, yeah, I've kind of very much moved away, and I now start thinking about images as sets to complement each other, where there's a story to be told. And it's really changed my approach and how much enjoyment I get out of photography when I'm out and about. I can go somewhere and I'm not wanting to come back with one wow image. I'm looking to actually build a body of work and sets of images, and kind of take that different approach. And it's also allowed me to look at sequencing, how images flow from one to another, where some good images work as part of a body, but don't necessarily work as standalone, and then also where there's images that really work standalone, but they don't bring anything to the set. And another aspect that was really focused to be on is bringing more of a consistent approach to editing, so that you can look at a set of work and actually there's a bit of a consistent style and a bit of theme. And it's also as a result of beginning to get interested in photo books, and not just printing images. So these are kind of the initial shots that when I started looking at maybe approaching a similar style, these were all taken in the Faroe Islands. And then this was from my second trip up to Lofoten, just exploring down on a beach. And it wasn't something I'd probably done too much of, but it was just looking at shapes, subject matters. And I've got a whole series of these shots, which I think some of them have been processed. I don't think I've maybe shared these 3 before, but again, I'll at some point I will work through the rest of the body of work and maybe put something out there. I don't know what form it will take, maybe a book or something like that. Even if it's just for myself, just to enjoy the work. These were 3 images up in Durness, which I think I originally processed as huge big panoramas, and then actually went back to revisit the squares. Again, okay, there's maybe different tonal variations between them. The horizons aren't quite perfect, but it's a nice way to look at just different shapes and patterns in the sand and in the sky, and just the peninsula at different points as well. So that's kind of one other aspect. And then just some very simple shapes and patterns standing at the side of a lake and looking how the snow interacts with the ice, and bringing in some rocks and some sticks just to add a bit of interest. So that was kind of the shift for me, probably end of 2018, 2019 into kind of the start of lockdown. And output for me is a huge big thing. I know everyone's caught up, or so many people are caught up in social media, whereby we're kind of posting images and then they flick through at 1 million rates per knot, and it's not really for me. I'm really interested in how work can be shared. So I became quite interested in making photo books. I enjoy all forms of books. I collect a lot of books, but for me, photo books is really interesting because you're beginning to look at sequencing and how images really do work together, as opposed to just putting out a bundle of images. And a big interest also for photo books was that I enjoy printing my work, but I don't want to end up just with a box of prints because I can only have so many prints on my wall. So by making photo books and understanding the whole sequencing and how images work together enables me to put together bodies of work of my own images, which I've thoroughly enjoyed doing, and to be honest, I probably don't do enough. So I travelled down, did a workshop with Joseph Wright. You should check his work out. Fantastic, makes beautiful, stunning books, and it was fascinating to look at your work in an entirely different perspective, and for others to look at your work as well. And other people see so many different things from what you see yourself, and from there on, it's really just opened my eyes to how I look at my own work. I came back and I've not made as many books, but I have attempted to do some, and it's been great from that point of view. This small project I did was just for a little body of work shot locally one misty morning, and it was really just to see how I could take a set of 12 images, sequence it down to maybe 9 images, get the correct order, and then kind of print it out myself and stitch it all together. It's something I really enjoy doing. I find it incredibly therapeutic, and you end up with a beautiful tactile object that, frankly, if I actually changed any of the images or wanted to change it, I can just undo the stitching, shuffle images around, and then create a new book. So this is something I continue to do. I've got a whole bundle of these sample book designs that I kind of make, and ideas that are going through in my head, and I'll come on to talk about some ideas for some work that I've kind of been working on, and I would like to probably make some handmade books of them in order to kind of publish and share the work, because I think that's the best way, instead of putting them on a website. So that's one aspect to kind of the output of my work, and I've made other books. That box was handmade as well. There's a couple of workshops I've been on in Glasgow that kind of teach you how to do that. It took me 3 evenings to make that one box. The company I did it with, they can make it in 26 minutes. So it goes to show it takes a wee bit longer for myself, but it's really enjoyable, and you're then left with something that actually you can be quite proud of and a real enjoyment. And I then published a small zine called Anticipation earlier this year, which was a set of 12 images all shot on my Hasselblad, and you can probably kind of guess the general theme behind them. They're all shot in the winter and the snow, but it's the anticipation of taking a shot in a film camera. You think you've got everything right, you think you've got the settings correct, but really you've got no idea what image you're going to come away with until you get the film developed and you get images scanned. And it's a wonderful feeling. That a bit nervous, to be perfectly honest, and there weren't too many images that were bad, but it's a wonderful feeling. And I hope in future to maybe publish some more zines along a similar sort of theme, because I think it's a great way to be able to share your work, and a really affordable way to be able to share your work as well. I've then also gone on to do some screen printing, because I'm always interested in exploring new ways to output your work. So I did some screen printing influenced by photography, and there's kind of like 3 distinct blocks here that I'm using different colors with, which then created, this is a print. I kind of messed up on one of my prints, hence why there's a wee white blob in the middle of it. But then the influence comes from my photography, one of my shots from Glasgow when it's been a bit misty. So again, it's just exploring new ways that maybe make me think about my own work differently. This was another example where I kind of just took some simple blocks from North Berwick, and just trying to kind of explore how you might be able to take your photography to a different angle, different perspective. I did a set of images, a body of work called Silence in the City, which was all shot in Glasgow during the Beast from the East back in 2018, and I did a bit of a workshop on this and sequencing, because I was keen for someone to be able to come on and look at the work, but not to just scroll down at a rate of knots that you don't actually take in any of the narrative that's behind it. So I introduced a bit of text. I laid it out very differently. So there's some images where there's 2 big images and a small set of 6. And then I introduced a video halfway down, just to slow people down, to be able to control how the viewer experiences it, because there was a story, there was a narrative to it, and for me that's all part of my work now, as opposed to just saying, well, here's a page of 50 images, scroll down it and you'll probably never remember much about it. I'm trying to just make people slow down and kind of take in what I'm trying to get across. And I went a step further and I did a short video. I don't know how well this will play. It runs for a couple of minutes, but it incorporates a lot of sound and BBC sound effects as well. Hopefully that wasn't too delayed for everyone. If you want to see the video, it's on my website. But for me, it was a total different experience for someone to view the images. That was a real bit of OCD, to be honest. Once I started, I think my first version had maybe 2 sound effects through the whole thing, and then by the end of it, I've got the music in the background and 4 or 5 layers of sound effects at different times. But it gives everyone a different experience, and for me it makes an emotional connection to the work that I have that the viewer doesn't. And it's a real interesting way for me of presenting your work, and it's something I'll probably look to incorporate in work in the future as well. So more recently, very much changed and now very much focused on particular sets, projects, series. I know they all mean different things to different people. And now all my work is now all square, and it's all black and white. That's the format I like, and I've kind of got limited time, so actually I get more enjoyment from working in the constraints of that format. I still go out for sunrise, even although what colours in the sky really makes no difference, but it does mean that there are no people around, so the sand is still perfect without any footprints. But that it's given me a real drive and a real focus to enjoy my photography a lot more. So I'll start by just looking through some images. I did a set on field lines, which, as you can see, I think these ones have all been shared online. I'll come to share some images soon which haven't been. And it's a simple, bold nature of the fence with the nice white field, and then in the background just the textured hillside of some of the snow coming through on the heather. And again, that's the sort of thing that appeals to me. Real quite simplicity in the image, very simple elements, things that stand out to me. I quite like this one, just with the muted distance and just the snow coming down. I could stand for hours taking these sorts of shots, patterns on the right hand side, and then just the beautiful white field. But the gate really stands out for me, and also the straight line of the fence right up the middle. And I take lots of these shots. A lot of them don't work. A lot of them I think, yeah, they look great. And it's probably partly the reason why I wait so long before processing work, because I think if I get home, I think, yeah, that image should look really good. I've got visions of what it'll look like in my head, but actually it quite often isn't. And I then maybe would end up a wee bit disappointed. So actually waiting could be a couple of months, a couple of years before I start looking at work. I kind of take away that emotional connection, and I begin to look at it on a more neutral perspective. Again, just some more images from field lines. I love the separation between the wall and the trees here, and also just the dusting of snow in the trees in the front. And the final one in this set, but as well as just looking at them, I'm always interested to see how they work well together. So I always will look at them in terms of which ones sit well together. Do they tonally work well together? Is the subject matter working well as well? And I still really enjoy going and photographing some long exposures, quite minimal, out by the sea. Did a set out in the edge, and also now I'm less bothered if there's a clear blue sky. I think there's one very small cloud in this image, but I quite like it. It's like some people will say, oh, well, there's no interest in the sky. For me, there doesn't need to be. I shoot for what I enjoy, what I like, and this appeals to my eye. Playing really here with the dark tones of the water. I think I struggled with this image for a while. Went from light to dark, but eventually settled on dark. It made a nice contrast to the other 2 images. This is kind of a small set of images along at North Berwick, where you've really got to work very quickly because the tide goes up and down pretty quickly, and all of a sudden you can have some of the horrible rocks that begin to get exposed in the corners, and it then just detracts from the minimalism that I'm looking for, and just the cleanliness of the shot. And again, just looking at how they work together. And then I'll make some further adjustments just to see if I can tonally balance things off, or balance off the shapes, the subjects. The horizon here don't obviously work particularly well together, but you've always got to make some sacrifice. This is just a small set of images which are all based on all based on fence posts going in. And again, as standalone images, they probably do nothing for me, but I like the abstract nature of them, and it just gives me ideas for where I am in maybe other locations that I can begin to add to this set of work over a period of time. I will probably never do anything with them. I will probably print them out as a small series of work for my own personal enjoyment, but it's something that interests me. I love being up high, particularly on misty mornings, kind of capturing just down below, picking out small points of interest. Just a small series of work. And again, it is something I'll add to over time. This is some woodland photography, forest peripheries, and for me it's really about outside of the forest, looking into it, very much focused. I don't know how dark this will be in people's screens, and very much focused on just looking deep into the forest, deep into the trees, and it's the shape of the trees, just a couple of those branches that are kind of curved over that interest me, and then something that's a bit longer, standing back, looking deep into the forest. These were much lighter, far more revealing outside, a bit more mist, help with the separation. And I like the contrast between the light and the dark with these images. Closer to home, I enjoy shooting Glasgow when it's particularly misty and particularly foggy. It gives a real sense, a sense of atmosphere from a different era. There's some beautiful bridges in Glasgow, some real interesting characters. Only problem is we don't get nearly enough mist that I would like, so the days and the opportunities are far limited. In fact, I don't think we've had a day this year where I've been able to get out and shoot some misty river conditions. And again, it's just the boldness of the colours, all shot for with square format in mind. And it's work that I would hope to be able to add to in the future. I think during lockdown was a great opportunity to be able to go out and shoot Glasgow at night. I think these were shot about 11 o'clock on a Friday night. I would not normally be out in Glasgow with a camera at that time of the evening, but it was a great opportunity just to explore the city centres. The streets were deserted, and it was also great to work on images where it was predominantly black, predominantly dark, with just some small bits of light to bring the focus into the point of view. Again, now that we're back to normal conditions, I don't know if I'll be out shooting these sorts of scenes in Glasgow on a Friday evening anytime soon. These images came from the coast, down in the west coast of Scotland. I went down with a good friend, Dylan Nardini. The forecast was a really high tide, very windy, very stormy. It couldn't have been any calmer if you tried hard enough. So it's all about then trying to explore different opportunities, and I kind of took the chance to just explore some nice, simple shots focused around some of the rocks, some of the formations. Just a very clear sky, so there's minimal detail in it, which I now quite like. For a while I'd have thought, yeah, I'm not so sure about that sky, there's not much in it, but now actually I'm perfectly content if it's quite a plain sky, as long as I can get it to balance off with what's in the foreground and the rest of the image. And images that I don't think do anything dramatic by themselves, but I think there's maybe scope to work on them as a body of work going future. More shots from Glasgow on the green. And I've got so many shots from Glasgow Green. It's kind of my local park as such, but it really transforms when there's a bit of mist. So I've now got a few spots that I've been to. I've probably done enough photography there. I'd like to maybe get some snowier weather conditions to do it justice at some point, but it's been a great opportunity to explore over the last couple of years when we were in lockdown. These are images, again, really focused on the ridge point. Everyone thinks they're at the top of the mountain, whereas in fact they're not. But I just love the shapes and the textures, the real dark tones, and then just fading away down into the corners. This was a particularly snowy morning, really very hard work. The wind was howling, the snow was just getting on top of the lens every single shot. But it's worth it. It's one of the real enjoyments. It's part of the reason why I enjoy doing photography. To get out in conditions like that, and you come back and you feel a sense of satisfaction and real enjoyment. This is some recent shots that I've published, which were from Shetland. Went up there last October. A wonderful place. The rain was dreadful everywhere else in the rest of the country, apart from we had clear blue skies for 5 nights up in Shetland. You couldn't write it. Certainly I would love to go back, but I know fine well that the next time I go back, it will be howling a gale and torrential downpour. But just a beautiful, beautiful landscape, beautiful coastline. Probably took me 9 months to kind of process these images, because I can remember vividly standing in these locations. There's such an emotional thought process that goes through them that actually I needed the time to disassociate myself from it and just come back and be a bit more pragmatic about it. And just, yeah, just a beautiful build up of layers, and the water is just absolutely ferocious there. We did have one misty morning, which was beautiful. We found a nice wee small lock of water, and yeah, my focus is really just very, very minimal, very quiet, tranquility. Less is more is kind of the way I look at things, and I've got a lot more images from there to kind of work my way through, which hopefully I'll be able to do over the coming months. I say that every few months about my work. So again, as well as all of that work, which I've kind of published on my website, which is where I generally do it first before I kind of then pump it around social media as everyone else does. I've got a lot of work which I'm continuing to work on, and a lot of these haven't been shared because I'm kind of determining what the most appropriate output is for them, whether that is on the website, whether that is in some form of printed matter, be it a book or print or whatever that is. And I enjoy, as I've said, I enjoy printing work. My prints now are very, very small. I prefer the intimate nature of things. I don't print huge, big 2 feet by 2 feet prints. And the first few images are kind of just one-off images that I've been working on that may or may not lead to some future bodies of work. This one's from up in Iceland. This is from up in the north of Scotland. Some more of my trees, which will no doubt be added to. This, again, one just the whiteness and just some of the nice textures of the rocks and the 3 fence posts at the front. This is a recent image from down in the North Yorkshire moors, where I think we saw more mist in 4 PM on a Saturday afternoon than we saw the whole year in Scotland. This is a black and white version of one of the shots I showed earlier. Another shot from up in the north of Scotland. And then just the boldness of the shapes in the trees. I really like the structure to them. Again, another one of the Scotland shots in black and white. I now find myself going over to re-look and revisit some of my old photography, because the subject matter, the compositions, is probably still all very relevant to what I enjoy photographing now, but my approach to processing and the sorts of thing I'm looking to do with images has changed somewhat. So I enjoy revisiting old images to see what my new approach would be to the same work. I love telegraph poles, the simplicity of them, and just a simple structure. So I'm perfectly happy spending a morning in some misty conditions, photographing the shapes, the wires, the cables, as everything disappears off into the distance. There's another one. I'd gone down to this location looking for some misty conditions around another spot. There wasn't any mist in that, but thankfully there was some mist up on the top of the moors. So I spent a bit of time just trudging around a field to kind of photograph some of the beautiful shapes. This was up in the north of Scotland, just lovely curved nature of the land with the trees. Again, very, very snowy morning, but just a wonderful, wonderful experience to be out capturing it. Just a lone tree, but it's the lone tree and then just the nice smooth nature of the curved bank, and off into the distance, very, very much muted out, which I've probably muted out even more in post-processing. I do edit all my photographs. I do it all in Photoshop for anyone who's interested, and it's all basically just in the curves tool. I don't do anything in Lightroom now, and it's basically just imported, converted to black and white, and then I'll make localized adjustments for what I want to emphasize. And again, there's maybe a few more shots from this, but it's work that I'll look to add to over time. But it's the challenge is finding the time and getting out to places to photograph it. Given I'm working all day, inevitably it will be beautiful snowy conditions during the day, and the snow will have vanished by the weekend. These are some more trees with a bit of beautiful mist. Again, these were all autumn, just the different shades of the leaves. And I'll spend a lot of time trying to get all the necessary separation between them. There's always a bit of overlap, no matter how hard you try. But just the different thicknesses of the trunks, different shapes of the trees in the background and the branches, leaves scattered on the ground. And yeah, I've got a lot of these from these locations, and I'm not quite sure how I'll pull them all together. I suspect it'll probably be maybe some form of concertina book might work quite nicely just for the series of them, whether I do maybe snow on one side and do some mist on the other. I've yet to decide. But yeah, these kind of all sit on my hard drive until I decide what to do with them. I could throw one out, but what does one image mean? For me, it's the collection of images. It's the variety and showing the actual narrative and the story behind the location. And you don't get that if I just plug one image up on the website or up on social media. I spent a week or 4 or 5 days in Venice just prior to lockdown. It was supposed to be misty every morning. I think it was misty the last morning. But at the same time, it was lovely clear skies, not a cloud in the sky. So it's quite nice just to take a fresh approach, and it balances off quite nicely with the smoothness and the softness of the water. So again, set of images I've been kind of working on. I'd go back in and make minor tweaks on a regular basis. Apologies if you can hear my cat in the background. She's busy meowing away. And again, there's just something nice about the solid structure of the board that you walk out to, and everything else is you've just got a touch of movement around the boats. I did get the mist one morning, and it was lovely just to be out shooting and kind of capturing them. But it's to try and put your own spin on it. You see so many other photographers who've been to Venice, so I don't just want to kind of start throwing out images here and there from my trip. I want to have like some meaning around the story and my experiences of being in Venice. I think this morning it was misty. I was running around like a headless chicken around the banks, just trying to capture as many different compositions as possible. It was fair to say, because I'd been up about 4 mornings before, I knew kind of where all the spots were that I wanted to go and photograph. But it's still nice. It's nice, and it's a real nice enjoyment when you get the conditions you kind of hope for. You never come back with the images that you envisage taking, but at the same time, it's always a good experience. So somewhere I'd love to go back to and revisit. And I think now going back, I would have a whole different approach and come back with even different images again. But it's all part of the process. Got some nice, very simple minimalism as well of the kind of the markers out in the middle of the lagoon. So again, this will be something I'll eventually get around to doing something with. Don't know what it is, what it will be. Might do a little zine of it at some point. Some more images from kind of my liminal space in Glasgow, again, when it was a bit of a misty evening. Just shooting something different, and it's quite nice to do that every once in a while. I don't like really photographing people, but it's lovely to try and see some of the shapes and the structures in Glasgow. Anyone who's been to Glasgow knows Slater's menswear. Then 4 years ago, I was fortunate enough to visit Japan, and I managed to spend a single day in Hokkaido out doing some photography. It was a very expensive day, but worth it. And the probably one of my favorite places that I've ever been to photograph, to be honest. And even if I hadn't come back with any images, just the joy and the feeling of stepping out of a vehicle to see some locations that you know so well from looking at other people's work is just a wonderful experience, and it really gets you going. I think I was probably most nervous to make sure some of the images came back sharp, but I've had these images for nearly 5 years now, and I've done various edits of them, but I think I'm now getting to the point where I'm a bit happier with them. And again, I'm just trying to determine how I want to display the work. I don't want to just put them up on the website, because people will flick through them in a matter of seconds, and actually there's a whole story to be told behind them. But it's a beautiful landscape. The snow is about 3 feet deep. You're basically standing on mini platforms, and if you take a step forward, you effectively end up to your waist in snow. Just the lone trees, and then the clusters of trees, and I'm sure everyone's probably seen pictures of these trees, this one tree before, I think is known as a Christmas tree. But it's the lovely soft nature of the sweeping hill in the background as well. Just something nice and simple about it, and I don't want to make it complex. I just want to make it as minimal and nice, as clean as possible. Hopefully your screens still allow you to see the separation between the sky and the snow. I have tried to make it as close to negligible as possible, because that's what the experience was like. Beautiful conditions when we were there. And again, I've still got a lot of work or a few images to process from the set, and then I'm trying to determine, right, what's the most suitable output to do. I'll probably make some adjustments to the skies just to get them a bit better tonally balanced, particularly with images in the bottom right. And some more recent shots with a good friend. As you can see, I do like photographing trees. And I would say I'm quite selective over some conditions that I like. I really do the mist and fog, just to kind of isolate everything, distract from the background. And having all these kind of little projects and little sets, it's what is always in the back of my mind when I go out to photograph, and I can be driving anywhere and just see something that I think, yeah, that maybe has an idea. Even if it's only ever 3 shots, for me, it's just beginning to work on something. It might then stop. There's just more meaning and more of a story behind it than just taking a single shot. I think these are some of the last shots. These were up in north of Scotland earlier this year. Some very minimal Bruce Percy-esque from some of his Iceland work. Unfortunately, these weren't in Iceland. But yeah, just the simplicity of the boulders on top on the ridge of the mountain. And for me, it works as black and white. That's what I like. That's how I view things. I shoot in colour, so I compose in colour. I compose in square format. But I always imagine, I always envision things in how they will be, and just where the tones vary. Some images don't work for me, so I always kind of acknowledge and accept that not everything is going to work, and sometimes I come back and yeah, I'm a bit disappointed, but it's one of these things. I would rather focus on one particular aspect of it and not actually then dart between color, dart between black and white, dart between different ratios, different formats. I like a consistency. I find it helps me focus on my work, and allows me to probably improve the quality of what I'm hopefully shooting. That's what we're generally all trying to do, is continuously to strive and improve the work. Again, it was a lovely walk. More images to come from that. So that's kind of like an up-to-date of where I am with images. There's always more images that I find on the hard drive. But as was mentioned earlier, about 2 years ago, I started a little side project called Biblioscapes. So I collect photo books. Not my first book collection. My first book collection is Ur Willie and the Bruins Annuals. For anyone who's Scottish, you'll know exactly what they are. But basically, I have all of them going back to 1949. They're now far too expensive, so I started collecting something else. So photo books, Biblioscapes is really just a digital library of my personal collection of photo books from around the world. And I kind of add new books to it all the time. I think there's maybe about 400 books and zines on there at the moment. And it's anything that really takes my interest. So there's a whole host of subjects, different photographers from all over the world, different themes. There's a lot of books I collect that aren't the styles of books that I would photograph, style of photography that I would photograph myself. I get just as much an enjoyment and pleasure from looking through those books. The format's pretty consistent. I post a flick through video on the website. I think there's an example coming up. Yeah, so Northern England, Michael Kenna. Great book if you've not got it. I love a bit of industrial architecture, so the format's the same. I post a little flick through video of all the books, so that people can enjoy and see what a maybe book looks like, particularly when it's harder to find or rare books. I know a lot of students make use of the site if they're preparing work, and I put a bit of information about it. And then I also then started a podcast, so I publish a weekly podcast. I've now done, I think, about 106 episodes. I publish it every Thursday, and I speak to different photographers whose books I have in my collection about their photography. It's really been quite a fascinating experience. When I started it, I didn't think if there'd be any interest. I was unsure if I would get any photographers who wanted to take part, but sure enough, 106 photographers later, managed to speak to the likes of Martin Parr, Paul Wakefield, Rachel Talabart, whole host of photographers, David Ward, Simon Baxter. You can see a lot of names there, and a whole range of subject matters as well: landscape, portrait, documentary, and some fascinating and really inspirational discussions. And yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I'll see how long I can continue making new episodes. As long as there's people who are publishing books, then I will try to do it. And I think that is pretty much it. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoyed that, and I think I'm pretty much on the hour, which I'm quite amazed about. So I will stop sharing now if I can't.
Yeah, you're pretty much bang on time, so that's perfect. It was very generous of you to share so much of your workflow and your journey through photography. I think, and I recognise quite a lot of the names out there, and people will have done the same thing. You start off with a wide angle, you start off with trying to cram everything in, and lots of colour and lots of heavy contrast, and you narrow it down and you simplify it and you make it simpler and you take away the colour. And the RPS guys, I don't know how much you know about the RPS, but we work in panels. So your own approach there, where you're saying, well, it's not just an image, it's various images, and how you put the images together and how you line them up and how you sequence them, that is part of the art of all that stuff. So it was interesting to see that. I've got one easy question for you. You said you've ended up on black and white and you've ended up on square.
Yeah.
And you do have a Hasselblad analog camera. So what came first? Was it buying the Hasselblad camera, or was that a format you wanted to work in and you bought the camera to match that? Or
yeah, so I kind of started on square black and white long before I bought the Hasselblad. The Hasselblad was always something I'd always had a wish to toy and use medium format black and white film camera. It'd been an idea that'd been kind of rattling around in my head for a couple of years. I eventually treated myself to the Hasselblad for my 40th birthday on a bit of an impulse buy, but it was great. So, but yeah, I kind of like solidified my decision and my reasoning behind going for that. But the black and white and square format was always something that really appealed to me from a long time, and I kind of just made a decision a wee while ago that yeah, this is what I'm going to focus on. And I know that there'll be shots that I miss out on. I know that not everything works, but you know, something I can live with that. I know some people can't, and they still feel the urge to go back and forth between other formats. I don't have an issue with that. It's just a case of, right, that's fine. I don't publish color. I just that this is what I'm working on, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you just have to accept these things and move on. And it's hard at the time, but you get used to it.
Okay, it's interesting because there's your wee video sequence, because when you said it was a video, I thought it would be like a video, but it was a video sequence, which was actually really nice. And there was a slowness and a stillness and a calmness about it, which made me think of Japan and Scandic type things. But the Hasselblad kind of makes you work that way because it's not automatic. You have to set everything yourself. You have to take the time. The photograph you had of you looking down at your viewfinder and your feet in the way and all that stuff. I mean, it's a definitely slower way of working, and that seemed to reflect, your photographs seem to reflect that. The way you put them together reflected that. So that's obviously a conscious choice as well. So it seems quite fortuitous you've gone Hasselblad, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. It's yeah, the Hasselblad I would say has made me even slow down even more. I probably take fewer and fewer photographs now than I ever have done. Because I would say I'm probably, yeah, I can set something up and then wait for time. But yeah, the Hasselblad's a wonderful experience because being Scottish, you're quite tight with money. So you think about the cost of every time you press the shutter or click the shutter and the wonderful sound. And it's a tricky balance because you want to press the shutter button just to hear the beautiful sound of the Hasselblad, but at the same time, you know that it's going to cost you money. So it's weighing that up. But at the same time, it is wonderful just to set it up. And I've set it up and seen myself wait for half an hour, and it's not been the shot I wanted. Then I just pack the camera up and go back and go home again or do whatever I'm doing. And again, I think some people maybe feel the urge to press, click. I don't. I just maybe it's just me, but I'm quite happy just to work in my own pace. And yeah, I don't feel the urge. It's part of what kind of interests me in photography and art. Really is. It's just that's fundamentally what it is. We're all creating art. Just happens we use a camera to start that process off. But yeah, it's a great way of working, just very slow. And the music behind it and the video sequence, it was all about kind of slowing down and stopping to think about the images as opposed to just the speed at which life seems to go by all the time.
And it does, you know, fast food, fast this, fast that, social media, they're all fast, and there's a superficiality about it all, but with your work, you do get the feeling of the slowness. And you talked about Hokkaido and Bruce Percy. I see you've been talking to Bruce Percy as well. He's another one who has gone for that very simplistic, very graphic style, and yeah, it's a lovely style to look at. Although your own collection, you do have a lot of books on documentary and much more busy scenes, so it's good to see everything.
Absolutely. I think you can take influence and inspiration from everything. So yeah, but for me, for what works for me, for my mind and my eyes, is the simplicity and the easy nature of things.
Yeah, well, Debbie Hammonds asked, can you listen to the recording? So you can, I know if you go into the Biblioscape's website, then you can look at all the podcasts that have been done, and they're all still there, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they're all there, and I think they're all in all the usual Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual players, etc. They seem to pick everything up, so they're all there. Plenty of hours of easy listening.
Yeah, I like the wee format of the books as well, where you do the wee video thing. I've watched quite a lot of them, and it's quite, especially with the green square background, it's almost like Art Attack used to be in television with Gary the Boy Hart, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and he used to the wee plasticine man Morph would move things around.
Yeah, well, that's it. I just kind of use my cutting mat. I know someone doesn't like the cutting mat, doesn't like the green background, but no, for me it's just, it was sticking with a simple format that I could replicate very easily on a very frequent basis. I think the initial upload of all the books, I think there's about 250 books I had to record during lockdown to begin with. Thankfully, it's a bit more of a easy going task, but they all generally come in droves, so I can spend a few hours having to record them. But yeah, it's a nice simple format that I think works well, and it adds something a bit different. And I always contact the photographers before I put their book on to make sure they're happy with it and don't mind doing it. And so far, I don't think anyone's really said no.
And Bridget's asked, how do you get that sort of uniformity of tonality amongst your images? Because obviously they're all different locations, some are different locations. So is that the times when you don't get that tonality, you just pack your camera up, or do you do a lot of post-processing to simulate them? Or?
Yeah, so if I'll always load the images all up to look at anything that I'm working on together, and then once I've done the first initial edits, it is then going back in and making further edits to get a bit of uniformity between the images. Particularly when it's maybe from different locations or different shoots entirely. So yeah, I'm very mindful, and it's all done in pretty much in post-processing, and I use very limited tools. As I said, pretty much the curve tool does most of it, so I'll maybe have to tweak the exposure slightly if something's a wee bit darker. But it's really just that's my approach, and I'll load them up all on the screen, and I will go away, and images can sit up on the screen for a long time before I'm done with them, just going back and forth every day until I see what bits jump out at me. And then printing things off, I would always encourage, as I'm sure most people here probably do, print all your work off, because the number of times I've thought an image is done, print it off, and then something obvious really jumps out to me as being incorrect. And then it allows me just to make some minor tweaks and minor adjustments. And you don't need a fancy printer to be able to do that. Just get a good quality printer, some good paper, and that will do the job. You don't need to be getting the fine art pigment inks for printers for doing that sort of work.
Yeah. But again, there's been a few folks saying that they tune into, obviously some of your normal listeners tune into your podcast and get your Sunday night email, which brings into the email on a Sunday evening. And they're just saying how nice it is to see your own work and to see your own journey going through that. So that's good to see that. And I'll wrap up, because obviously folk will want to go away home, and you will as well. We're all at home now, but it was nice to see the craftsmanship from the photography side, but also even making the books up and making the boxes for the books and the hand stitch stuff. We saw a bit of that when Isabel Curdays was talking with her stuff. Yeah. She makes her own handmade books. And it's a nice way, and I like the way you're giving thought to the presentation, not just about the images, it's how you present the images, whether it is in 3s or 6s or in books or fold out books or the wee video presentations. It hopefully gives everybody a lot of things to think about and some inspiration for themselves, which is the whole point of these kind of talks. And so on that note, I'll say thank you once again to Euan for sharing so generously his time and his thoughts and his processes. And I'll also thank everybody for coming along, and hopefully we'll see most of you at some of the other nights we're having throughout the season. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'll let